I never thought I'd have to beg my own daughter to help me wash my body, but there I was, 3 days after surgery, standing in the doorway of my bathroom with one hand gripping the frame for balance, the other pressed against my abdomen where the stitches pulled with every shallow breath. The smell of antiseptic clung to my skin, mixed with something else. The stale scent of someone who hadn't been able to properly bathe in days. I hated it. I hated feeling this weak, this reduced, this utterly at the mercy of someone else. Clara? My voice came out smaller than I intended, barely above a whisper. She was in the living room, her phone glowing in her hand, the television murmuring in the background. I could see the blue light reflected on her face, illuminating the expression I'd grown so familiar with over the past year. That distant, irritated look that said she'd rather be anywhere but here, with anyone but me. She didn't look up. What? Honey, I need help. With the shower. The doctor said I shouldn't get the incision wet yet, but I need to clean myself. I can't reach. My throat tightened. Even asking felt like swallowing glass. I'd spent 55 years being the one who helped others. I bathed Clara when she was small, held her when she was sick, carried her when she was too tired to walk. And now, here I was, reduced to this. Clara finally glanced up, and what I saw in her eyes made something inside me go cold. It wasn't concern. It wasn't even reluctance. It was disgust. Pure, undisguised revulsion. She stood slowly, pocketing her phone, and walked toward me with the reluctant shuffle of someone approaching an unpleasant chore. When she reached the bathroom doorway, she stopped. Didn't come inside. Just stood there, arms crossed over her chest, looking at me like I was something that had crawled out from under the refrigerator. "You smell like death," she said flatly. No apology in her tone, no softness. "I can't do this. You're not my responsibility anymore." The words hit me harder than any physical pain I'd felt in the hospital. They landed in my chest like stones, one after another, each one heavier than the last. I stared at her, searching her face for some sign that she didn't mean it, that exhaustion or stress had twisted her words into something crueler than she'd intended. But there was nothing, just that flat, cold expression, like she was stating a fact as simple as the weather. "Clara, My voice broke. "I raised you. I was there for everything. Every fever, every heartbreak, every—" "That was your choice," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "I didn't ask to be born. You decided to have me, to keep me, to raise me alone. That was all you. And now that you need something, suddenly I'm supposed to drop everything? I have a life, Mom. I have things to do. I can't be your nurse." She turned and walked back to the couch before I could respond. The television volume went up. The conversation was over. I stood there for a long moment, one hand still braced against the door frame, my legs trembling from the effort of standing. The bathroom mirror reflected someone I barely recognized, a woman with gray roots showing beneath her dyed brown hair, dark circles carved beneath her eyes, skin pale and slack. When had I become so old? When had I become someone my own daughter could look at with such contempt? I managed to close the bathroom door with shaking hands. The tile floor was cold under my bare feet. I turned on the faucet and let the water run, watching steam begin to fog the mirror, erasing my reflection bit by bit. Using the sink for support, I managed to strip off my nightgown, wincing as the fabric caught on the bandage covering my incision. The wound was angry and red around the edges, the stitches like tiny black insects crawling across my belly. The doctor's instructions echoed in my head. Keep the incision dry for the first week. Have someone help you with sponge baths. No lifting, no bending, no straining. You need to rest and heal. But there was no one to help. Just me, alone in this bathroom, with a daughter in the next room who couldn't be bothered to look at me without curling her lip in disgust. I wet a washcloth and began the slow, painful process of cleaning myself as best I could. My arms felt like they were made of lead. Every movement sent sharp pains radiating from the incision site. Twice I had to stop and grip the sink, breathing through waves of dizziness that made the room tilt and spin. The third time, my legs simply gave out. I don't remember hitting the floor. One moment I was standing, the next I was on my side on the cold tile, my head ringing, my body screaming. I tried to call out, but the sound that came from my throat was more of a wheeze than a shout. In the living room, the television kept playing. Clara's phone chimed with a notification. Life continued, indifferent to my suffering. I lay there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at the underside of the sink, at the rust stains and the dust bunnies I'd never been able to reach. This is what my life had become. This is what 55 years of sacrifice and love had earned me. Lying on a bathroom floor, too weak to stand, too proud to scream for help I knew wouldn't come. Eventually, I managed to pull myself up using the edge of the bathtub. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, like I was operating it from a distance through faulty controls. I dragged myself back to my bedroom, leaving the washcloth on the bathroom floor, giving up on the idea of being clean. What was the point? That night, I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of my daughter moving around the house. The refrigerator opening and closing, footsteps in the hallway, the bathroom door shutting. Normal sounds of normal life, continuing without me. I thought about all the nights I'd spent in this room, in this bed, when Clara was young. The nights I'd stayed awake listening for her breathing through the baby monitor, terrified that something would happen to her while she slept. The nights I'd paced the floor with her, burning up with fever, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, and singing lullabies until my voice gave out. The nights I'd waited up for her as a teenager, watching the clock and praying she'd come home safe. I'd been so young when I had her, just 22, barely more than a child myself. Her father had left before she was born, disappearing into whatever life he'd decided was more important than us. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, coming home exhausted to a crying baby, surviving on coffee and determination, and the belief that it would all be worth it, that she would grow up knowing she was loved, that she'd been wanted despite everything, that I would do anything for her. I'd sacrificed so much. My education, I'd been 2 semesters away from finishing my nursing degree when the pregnancy forced me to drop out. My career, I'd spent 30 years working retail jobs that paid just enough to survive, but never enough to thrive, always putting Clara's needs first. My relationships, there had been a few men over the years who'd shown interest, but I'd never let anyone get too close, too afraid of bringing someone into Clara's life who might hurt her or leave us. Everything I did was for her, every choice, every sacrifice, every dream I'd deferred or abandoned entirely. And now, here she was, in the next room, scrolling through her phone while I lay here unable to even bathe myself, treating me like I was an inconvenience she couldn't wait to be rid of. "You smell like death. I can't do this. You're not my responsibility anymore." The words played on repeat in my mind, each repetition cutting a little deeper. Not my responsibility anymore. As if I'd ever been a burden she'd graciously carried. As if the 18 years I'd spent raising her, feeding her, clothing her, loving her, had somehow created a debt she'd paid in full, and now resented being asked to acknowledge. I turned my face into the pillow and let the tears come silently, careful not to make any sound that might travel through the walls. Pride was all I had left, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd broken me. But something else stirred beneath the pain, something small and hard, like a seed taking root in dark soil. I couldn't name it yet, couldn't give it shape or voice, but it was there, waiting, growing. If you're watching this and you know what it's like to give everything to someone who gave nothing back, please subscribe to this channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and it helps more than you know. Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Tomorrow came, and the day after that. The pattern repeated itself with cruel consistency. I would wake in pain, struggle to the bathroom, manage the bare minimum of self-care, then retreat back to my room like a wounded animal to its den. Clara moved through the house like I wasn't there, her life continuing its normal rhythm while mine had ground to a painful halt. On the 4th day, I tried again, tried to ask for help, tried to reach whatever small part of her might still care. She was making breakfast when I shuffled into the kitchen, each step a negotiation between my body's limitations and my stubborn refusal to stay hidden in that bedroom forever. The smell of coffee and toast made my stomach clench with hunger. I hadn't eaten anything substantial since coming home from the hospital. The medications made me nauseous, and the effort of getting to the kitchen and preparing food felt insurmountable when I could barely stand for more than a few minutes at a time. Clara glanced up from her phone, her expression flickering with something that might have been annoyance or might have been guilt. It was hard to tell anymore. She'd gotten so good at hiding whatever she actually felt, presenting only this smooth, impenetrable surface that gave nothing away. "I need to go to the store," I said quietly, gripping the back of a kitchen chair for support. "We're out of the gauze pads. The doctor said I need to change the dressing, and I need more of the antibacterial soap. Could you—" "I have plans today." She didn't look at me when she said it, just kept spreading butter on her toast with mechanical precision. "Maybe tomorrow. The doctor said I need to change the dressing twice a day. I'm almost out. It's important, Clara. It's to prevent infection." My voice sounded pathetic even to my own ears, pleading for something so basic it shouldn't have required negotiation. She sighed heavily, the kind of theatrical exhale designed to communicate exactly how burdened she felt by my existence. "Fine. I'll pick some up later. Text me exactly what you need." "I don't know how to text pictures of medical supplies. Could you just take me with you? I can wait in the car. I just need to make sure we get the right—" "Mom." She finally looked at me, and the irritation in her eyes was unmistakable. "I said I'll handle it. You don't need to micromanage everything. I'm not a child." The irony of that statement would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. She was 33 years old, living rent-free in the house I'd bought with money I'd saved quarter by quarter over decades. She contributed nothing to groceries, utilities, or any other household expense, claiming she was between jobs and needed time to figure things out. This had been her excuse for the better part of 2 years. I'd told myself I was helping her, giving her space to find her path without the pressure I'd always felt. But standing there in my own kitchen, barely able to hold myself upright, watching her treat a simple request for medical supplies like an outrageous imposition, I wondered if I'd actually been helping at all, or if I'd just been enabling her to see me as something she could use when convenient and ignore when I became inconvenient. She left an hour later without saying goodbye. I heard her car start in the driveway, the engine fading as she drove away to whatever plans were more important than ensuring her post-surgical mother had the basic supplies needed to keep a wound from becoming infected. I made my way back to the bathroom and carefully peeled away the old dressing. The incision looked worse than it had the day before. The edges were more inflamed, and there was a yellowish discharge that hadn't been there previously. I cleaned it as best I could with what little supplies remained, then covered it with the last clean gauze pad, securing it with tape that barely stuck to my skin anymore. The face in the mirror looked like a stranger's. When had I become so gaunt? The surgery had taken weight I couldn't afford to lose, and the days of inadequate nutrition since coming home had carved hollows in my cheeks, made my collarbones protrude sharply beneath the thin fabric of my nightgown. I looked like someone wasting away, disappearing bit by bit. Clara didn't come home until after 10 that night. I heard her fumbling with her keys at the front door, heard her stumble slightly as she came inside. When she finally appeared in the doorway of my bedroom, I could smell the wine on her breath from across the room. "Did you get the supplies?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the empty hands hanging at her sides, from the guilty way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Oh shit, I forgot." She laughed, actually laughed, like it was some minor oversight rather than something that could seriously compromise my health. "Sorry, I'll get them tomorrow, I promise." She was gone before I could respond, her bedroom door closing with a soft click that somehow felt more final than if she'd slammed it. I lay there in the darkness, feeling the throb of the incision beneath the inadequate dressing, and something inside me began to shift. Not breaking. I'd been broken for days now. This was different. This was crystallization. The moment when pain transforms into something harder and clearer. When hurt becomes understanding. She wasn't going to help me. Not tomorrow. Not the day after. This wasn't about her being busy or overwhelmed or stressed. This was deliberate neglect, a conscious choice to let me suffer because on some fundamental level, she didn't care whether I suffered or not. Maybe she even wanted me to suffer, as some kind of retroactive punishment for all the ways I'd supposedly failed her as a mother. The realization should have devastated me. Instead, it brought a strange, cold clarity. If I was going to survive this, and I was going to survive this, I would have to do it alone. I would have to find resources I didn't know I had, strength I wasn't sure existed anymore. Because waiting for Clara to become the daughter I'd raised, the compassionate and caring person I'd tried so hard to nurture, was going to kill me. The next morning, I called my insurance company and asked about home health services. The representative was kind but firm. My policy didn't cover in-home nursing care for post-surgical recovery unless I met certain criteria I didn't qualify for. She suggested I reach out to family members or look into private care services, which started at $30 an hour. Money I didn't have, not with my savings depleted and unable to work for at least another month. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall where I'd hung a photograph of Clara's college graduation. She was smiling in the picture, her arm around my shoulders, both of us squinting against the bright sunshine. I'd been so proud that day, so full of hope for her future, so grateful that all the sacrifices had been worth it because she'd made it through school, beaten the odds that said children of single mothers from working-class backgrounds didn't get degrees. I'd paid for that education. Every semester, every textbook, every fee. I'd taken out loans I was still paying off, worked overtime shifts until my feet bled in my shoes, gone without so I could give her what I'd never had. And she'd accepted it all with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never had to fight for anything, who assumed that my sacrifices were simply her due. When had it gone wrong? I searched my memory for the turning point, the moment when the loving child became this cold stranger. But there was no single moment I could identify. It had been gradual, so slow I hadn't noticed until it was too late. The increasing distance during her teenage years that I'd told myself was normal adolescent independence. The way she'd stopped calling home regularly during college, our conversations becoming shorter and more perfunctory, the subtle shift in how she spoke to me, less like a daughter and more like someone addressing a service worker. By the time she'd moved back home 2 years ago, something fundamental had changed. She treated the house like a hotel, me like staff. When I'd tried to talk to her about it, about how hurt I felt by her coldness, she'd turned it around on me, made it about how I was being controlling and unable to let go, and making her feel guilty for having her own life. I'd backed off then, terrified of pushing her away entirely. Better to have her here but distant than to lose her completely. So I'd swallowed my hurt and told myself things would improve, that this was just a phase, that she was dealing with her own struggles, that my job as a mother was to love her unconditionally, even when she made it very hard to like her. But unconditional love, I was learning, didn't mean accepting unconditional cruelty. That afternoon, I managed to drag myself to the kitchen and assess what food remained. Not much, some rice, a few cans of soup, half a loaf of bread that was starting to mold. Clara had eaten through most of the groceries I'd bought before the surgery, and the thought of asking her to shop for more filled me with exhaustion that had nothing to do with my physical condition. I made myself rice and ate it plain, forcing down every tasteless mouthful because my body needed fuel to heal even if my spirit had given up on nourishment meaning anything more than basic survival. The silence in the house was absolute. Clara was in her room with the door closed, probably on her phone or watching videos, living her life in a space I paid for while I sat alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. The infection came on the 7th day. I woke with a fever that made my teeth chatter despite the sweat soaking through my nightgown. The incision burned with a heat that seemed to radiate through my entire abdomen, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. When I managed to peel back the dressing, the same one I'd been using for 3 days because Clara had never gotten the supplies, the smell hit me first. Sour and wrong, the unmistakable scent of infection. The wound had opened slightly at one end, and the discharge was no longer yellowish but greenish, thick and angry. The skin around the incision was hot to the touch, inflamed and spreading outward in red tendrils that I knew meant the infection was getting worse. I needed antibiotics. I needed proper wound care. I needed help. Clara was still asleep. It was Sunday morning, nearly 11, and she'd come home late again the night before. I could hear her snoring through her closed door as I shuffled down the hallway, each step sending jolts of pain through my abdomen. I knocked softly at first, then harder when she didn't respond. "What?" Her voice was muffled, thick with sleep and irritation. "I need to go to urgent care. The incision is infected. I have a fever. Can you drive me?" My voice cracked on the last word. betraying how frightened I actually was. Infections after abdominal surgery could be serious, could spread to the bloodstream, could become life-threatening if not treated quickly. Silence. Then the rustle of sheets. Footsteps approaching the door. She opened it just enough to peer out at me, her eyes still half closed, her hair a tangled mess. She looked at my face, pale and sweating, and her expression didn't change at all. No concern, no alarm, just that same flat annoyance I'd come to recognize as her default response to my existence. It's Sunday. I was out late. I need to sleep. She started to close the door. Clara, please. This is serious. I could call an ambulance if it's that serious. The door clicked shut. The lock turned. I stood there staring at the white-painted wood, my hand still raised from where I'd been reaching toward her. Call an ambulance. With what money? The ambulance ride alone would cost hundreds of dollars I didn't have, and she knew that. She knew exactly what my financial situation was because she lived here rent-free, contributing nothing while I stretched every dollar to cover both of us. I made my way back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think through the fog of fever. My phone sat on the nightstand, but who could I call? I'd spent so many years focused entirely on Clara, on survival, on getting through each day, that I'd let other relationships fall away. My coworkers from the department store where I'd worked for 15 years. We'd been friendly but never close enough to call in a crisis. My neighbors kept to themselves, and I'd done the same, too exhausted after work to cultivate friendships that required energy I didn't have. There was my sister Linda. We hadn't spoken in nearly 4 years, not since a stupid argument at Thanksgiving that had spiraled into her accusing me of being a martyr, who used my single motherhood as an excuse to make everyone else feel guilty. I'd been so hurt by her words, so angry at her complete failure to understand what my life had actually been like, that I'd cut off contact entirely. Pride and pain had kept us apart ever since. But pride didn't matter anymore when infection was spreading through your body and your daughter had just locked her bedroom door rather than drive you to urgent care. I found Linda's number in my contacts, where it had sat untouched for years. My finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before I pressed it. The phone rang 4 times, and I was preparing to leave a voicemail when she answered. Samara? Her voice was cautious, surprised. Is everything okay? The concern in her tone, the immediate assumption that something must be wrong for me to call after so long, broke something in me. My carefully maintained composure shattered, and suddenly I was crying. Deep, shaking sobs that hurt my incision and made my fever-addled head pound. Linda, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for calling, but I need help. I had surgery, and there's an infection, and Clara she won't even... The words tumbled out between sobs, barely coherent. Where are you? I'm coming right now. Send me your address. Her voice had changed completely, gone from cautious to commanding in an instant. Samara, listen to me. Send me the address. I'm leaving right now. I managed to text her the information, then sat there on the bed crying while the fever made the room tilt and spin around me. 45 minutes later, she lived across town. Linda was at my door. I heard her knock, heard her call my name when I didn't answer quickly enough, heard the doorknob turn. When she saw me, her face went white. Jesus Christ, Samara. How long have you been like this? A week. The surgery was a week ago. I was shaking now, my body's temperature regulation completely failing. The incision got infected. I needed supplies, but Clara, where is Clara? Linda's voice had gone very quiet, which I remembered from childhood meant she was furious. Her room, sleeping. My sister's jaw clenched. She helped me stand, supporting most of my weight as we moved slowly toward the front door. On the way out, she paused at Clara's bedroom door and pounded on it hard enough to rattle the frame. Clara Morrison, your mother is being taken to urgent care with an infected surgical wound. In case you give a damn. She didn't wait for a response, just guided me out to her car with a gentleness that made me cry harder. The urgent care doctor was a young woman who looked at my wound and then at me with barely concealed horror. Mrs. Morrison, this infection is quite advanced. Have you been changing the dressing regularly, keeping it clean? I tried. My daughter was supposed to get supplies, but I couldn't finish. Couldn't admit out loud how completely Clara had failed me. The doctor glanced at Linda. who'd insisted on coming back to the examination room with me. Something passed between them, some silent communication that needed no words. I'm going to prescribe a strong antibiotic, and we need to clean and properly dress this wound. You'll need to come back in 2 days so we can check for improvement. If it's not better, you'll need to be admitted to the hospital for IV antibiotics. She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with a thoroughness that made me gasp and grip Linda's hand. She showed Linda how to change the dressing properly, gave her a bag of medical supplies, wrote detailed instructions on a sheet that she handed to my sister rather than to me. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and someone checking this twice a day. Do you have support at home? The question was directed at me, but her eyes were on Linda. She does now, Linda said firmly. In the car on the way back to my house, Linda was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "How long has it been like this? With Clara?" "I don't know. Years, maybe. It happened so gradually I didn't notice until I was flat on my back and completely at her mercy, and discovered she had none to give. That Thanksgiving, when I said those things about you playing the martyr. I was wrong, Samira. I was so wrong. But I was also a little bit right." She kept her eyes on the road. "You gave that girl everything. You sacrificed everything. And in doing that, you never taught her that other people's needs matter. You never let her struggle, never let her face consequences, never showed her that love is supposed to flow both ways." The words stung because they were true. I'd been so determined to give Clara everything I'd never had, so focused on making sure she never felt the deprivation and struggle I'd experienced, that I'd created someone who took everything as her due and gave nothing back. I thought if I loved her enough, if I sacrificed enough, she'd see. She'd understand and appreciate and love her back? Linda finished quietly. "Honey, you can't earn love through sacrifice. You can't make someone care by showing them how much you're willing to suffer for them. Sometimes you just create someone who thinks your suffering is what you're for." We pulled into my driveway. Clara's car was gone. She'd left while we were at urgent care, hadn't bothered to text or call to see if I was okay. The house looked exactly as it had when we'd left, but somehow it felt different, like I was seeing it clearly for the first time. Linda helped me inside and settled me on the couch with pillows and blankets. She went through my kitchen, making notes of what food I had and what I needed. Then she went through my bathroom, my medicine cabinet, making more notes. She moved with the decisive efficiency of someone taking charge of a crisis, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. "I'm staying tonight," she announced, brooking no argument. "Tomorrow I'm going grocery shopping and getting whatever else you need. And we're going to have a conversation about what happens next, because Samira, you cannot keep living like this." That night, Linda made soup, real soup with vegetables and chicken, not from a can, and sat with me while I ate. She changed my dressing with steady hands, following the doctor's instructions precisely. She brought me water and medication, and adjusted my pillows when I needed to shift position. And when Clara finally came home around midnight, Linda was waiting in the living room. I couldn't hear everything they said. Linda had insisted I stay in my bedroom and rest, but I heard enough. I heard Linda's voice, controlled but ice cold, laying out exactly what Clara's neglect could have resulted in. I heard Clara's defensive responses, the justifications and excuses. And then I heard Linda say something that made the house go completely silent. "Your mother nearly died because you couldn't be bothered to buy gauze pads. Think about that. Think about what kind of person that makes you." Clara's footsteps stormed down the hallway. Her bedroom door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. But she was here. She was home. And she'd heard the truth spoken out loud by someone who wasn't me. Someone who wasn't asking for her love or approval, who had no investment in maintaining the careful fiction we'd both been living. Linda stayed for 3 days. 3 days during which Clara barely emerged from her bedroom, as if avoiding her aunt meant avoiding the reality of what she'd done. When she did come out, to grab food from the kitchen or leave the house entirely, she moved like a ghost, eyes down, saying nothing. The tension in the house was thick enough to choke on, but I was too exhausted to care. For the first time in a week, I was eating real meals, taking my medication on schedule, having my wound properly cared for. My body began the slow work of healing, even as something else inside me continued to break apart. On the third morning, Linda sat on the edge of my bed with a cup of tea she'd made for me. The steam rose between us, curling in the morning light that came through the window. She looked tired, older than I remembered. When had she gotten those lines around her eyes? Had they been there at that last Thanksgiving, or had 4 years of silence added them? "I need to go back to my family tomorrow," she said quietly. "But I'm not leaving you here alone with her. Not like this. Linda, I'll be fine. The infection is responding to the antibiotics. I'm getting stronger. That's not what I mean." She set down her tea and took my hand, her fingers warm and solid around mine. "Samara, you need to hear this. That girl is not going to change. I've watched her these past few days. The way she avoids you, the way she acts like she's the victim in all this. She's not going to wake up one morning and suddenly become the daughter you deserve." I pulled my hand away, an instinctive defense against words I wasn't ready to hear. She's going through something. She's struggling to find her place in the world. And I know I haven't been— "Stop." Linda's voice was sharp enough to cut through my excuses. "Stop making excuses for her. Stop taking responsibility for her failures. You've been doing that her entire life, and look where it's gotten you. Lying in a bed with an infected wound because she couldn't be bothered to buy medical supplies." The truth of it sat between us like a third presence in the room. I wanted to argue, to defend Clara, to explain all the ways I'd failed as a mother that had led to this moment. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, in a place I'd been refusing to look, I knew Linda was right. "I gave her everything," I whispered. "I sacrificed my whole life for her. How did it turn into this? Because you taught her that your needs don't matter. Every time you went without so she could have. Every time you worked yourself to exhaustion to give her opportunities. Every time you absorbed her anger or disappointment or cruelty without pushing back. You taught her that you were a resource to be used, not a person to be loved." Linda's voice softened. "And I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because you need to understand that this didn't just happen. It was built, piece by piece, with the best intentions and the worst results." I turned my face away, tears sliding down my temples into my hair. She was describing my entire approach to motherhood, the philosophy I'd built my life around, the belief that if I just loved hard enough, sacrificed deep enough, gave completely enough, I could overcome all the disadvantages of single parenthood and poverty, that I could create a daughter who would be grateful, loving, successful, happy. Instead, I'd created someone who saw my sacrifices as proof of my worthlessness rather than my love. What am I supposed to do? The question came out broken, small. She's my daughter. I can't give up on her. I'm not asking you to give up on her. I'm asking you to stop giving up on yourself. Linda stood, walked to the window, looked out at the backyard where years ago I'd pushed Clara on a swing set I'd bought secondhand and assembled myself. "You need to set boundaries. Real ones. She either starts contributing to this household and treating you with basic respect, or she needs to leave. She has nowhere to go, no job, no savings." "Exactly. Which means she has every reason to stay here and keep taking advantage of you." Linda turned back to face me. "Samara, listen to yourself. You're making excuses for why a 33-year-old woman can't be expected to support herself or show basic human decency to her mother. You're enabling her to be this person." The word enabling hit like a slap. I'd heard it before, in different contexts. Parents enabling their children's addictions. Spouses enabling their partner's abuse. I'd never thought it applied to me. I was just being a good mother, just supporting my daughter through a difficult time. Except the difficult time had lasted years, and my support had become the very thing allowing her to avoid growing up. "I don't know how to do what you're asking." My voice was barely audible. "I don't know how to stop being her mother. I'm not asking you to stop being her mother. I'm asking you to start being your own person, to remember that you matter too, that your needs, your health, your life, they're just as important as hers." Linda came back to the bed and sat down, taking my hand again. "And I'm going to help you. Not by staying. I can't do that. But by being here in other ways. Phone calls, visits, whatever you need. You're not alone anymore, Samara. But you have to decide you're worth fighting for." After Linda left the next day, after tearful goodbyes and promises to call every day, After she'd filled my refrigerator and written out medication schedules and made me promise to go back to urgent care for the follow-up appointment, the house fell into a new kind of silence. Clara was still avoiding me, but now her avoidance felt different. Less like she was busy with her own life, and more like she was hiding from something she didn't want to face. I spent those days alone thinking, really thinking, maybe for the first time in years, about who I'd been before Clara was born, a young woman with dreams of becoming a nurse, of helping people, of making a difference, about the choices I'd made, the paths I'd taken, the ways I'd slowly erased myself in service of someone else, about whether it had been worth it. The answer scared me, because no, it hadn't been worth it. Not if the end result was lying in a bed with an infected wound while my daughter locked herself in her room to avoid acknowledging my suffering. Not if 3 decades of sacrifice had produced someone who looked at me with contempt instead of love, but acknowledging that felt like admitting my entire adult life had been a waste, that every late night working extra shifts, every missed opportunity, every deferred dream had been for nothing. The grief of that realization was almost worse than the physical pain of the infection. On the 5th day after Linda left, I got out of bed for longer than just trips to the bathroom. I sat in the living room, the same room where Clara spent her days on the couch I'd bought, watching the television I paid for, eating food I provided. I looked around at the space I'd created, maintained, paid for through decades of work, and I felt something shift inside me. This was my house, my life, my body slowly healing from major surgery, and I was living like a ghost in my own home, tiptoeing around my daughter's moods, afraid to assert my own needs or existence for fear of, what? Making her angry? Making her leave? Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of those things. Clara emerged from her room around 2 in the afternoon, moving toward the kitchen with her usual distracted air, phone in hand. She barely glanced at me as she passed, as if I were just another piece of furniture. Clara. My voice was stronger than it had been in days. She stopped, turned, her expression wary. We need to talk. I'm busy, Mom. Can it wait? No. The word felt foreign in my mouth, this simple assertion of my own needs over hers. It can't wait. Sit down. Something in my tone must have surprised her, because she actually obeyed, perching on the edge of the armchair across from me like she might need to flee at any moment. She kept her phone in her hand, a barrier between us. Put the phone down, please. She hesitated, then set it face down on the coffee table. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we'd both been avoiding saying for years. I almost died, I said finally. The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. That infection could have gone septic. It could have killed me, and you locked your bedroom door rather than drive me to get help. That's not fair. You're being dramatic. It was just, don't. I held up a hand, stopping her mid-excuse. Don't minimize it. Don't explain it away. Don't tell me I'm overreacting or being too sensitive or asking too much. Just, for once, just listen. She closed her mouth, but her jaw was tight, her eyes defiant. The posture of someone preparing to defend themselves rather than actually hear what was being said. I have given you everything I have. My time, my money, my energy, my dreams, my health, everything. And I did it gladly because I loved you and I wanted you to have a better life than I did. But, Clara, somewhere along the way, I taught you that your needs were the only ones that mattered, that I existed to serve you, to provide for you, to sacrifice for you, and that nothing was ever owed in return. I didn't ask for any of that, she shot back, the familiar defense. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask you to sacrifice. No, you didn't. You're right. But you're 33 years old now, and you're still using that excuse to justify treating me like I don't matter, like my pain is an inconvenience to you, like basic human decency is too much to ask. My voice was shaking, but I pushed forward, and I let you. I let you treat me that way because I was afraid if I asked for more, you'd leave. You'd stop loving me. But Clara, the truth is, you already did. Her face went pale. That's not true. When was the last time you asked how I was feeling? When was the last time you did something kind for me without being asked? When was the last time you treated me like a person you actually cared about instead of a burden you're forced to tolerate? Each question landed like a stone. You don't love me, Clara. You might tell yourself you do. But love requires action. It requires care. It requires showing up for people even when it's inconvenient. She stared at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something crack in her carefully maintained facade. Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of genuine emotion or simply the reflexive response of someone who'd learned that crying could deflect confrontation. "That's not fair," she whispered. "You don't know what I'm going through. You don't know how hard things have been for me." "You're right. I don't. Because you never tell me. You live in this house, eat my food, use everything I provide, but you never actually talk to me. You never share what's happening in your life except when you need something from me." I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "But even if things are hard for you, Clara, that doesn't give you the right to be cruel. It doesn't excuse watching me suffer and doing nothing." She looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "I didn't know what to do. When you asked for help with the shower, I couldn't. The thought of seeing you like that, vulnerable and weak, it made me feel—" "What? Uncomfortable?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "You felt uncomfortable, so you walked away. You left me on a bathroom floor, crawling to try to clean myself because you couldn't handle being uncomfortable for 20 minutes. I'm not a nurse. I don't know how to take care of sick people. It's not my fault that you—" She stopped herself, but the words hung in the air between us, almost complete. "It's not my fault that you needed me." "No," I said quietly. "You're not a nurse. You're my daughter, and daughters help their mothers when they're sick. Not because they have medical training, but because they care. Because love means showing up even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you'd rather be doing something else." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this right now. You're trying to make me feel guilty, and I can't." "Sit down." My voice was harder than I'd ever used with her. "I'm not finished." "Well, I am." She grabbed her phone from the table, her hands shaking. "I'm not going to sit here and let you guilt trip me about—" "If you walk away right now, Clara, you need to keep walking." The words came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I didn't know existed until this moment. "You need to pack your things and find somewhere else to live, because I am done. Done being treated like I don't matter. Done sacrificing everything while you contribute nothing. Done pretending that this is normal or acceptable or loving." She froze, her face a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. "You're kicking me out? Your own daughter? After everything you just said about how I'm supposed to be there for you? I'm telling you that things need to change, that you need to decide whether you want to be part of a family or just take advantage of one. And if you can't do that, if you can't treat me with basic respect and decency, then yes, you need to leave." "I have nowhere to go." Her voice rose, the tears flowing freely now. "No job, no money, no—" "Exactly. Which is why you've been content to stay here and treat me like a servant. Because you have nowhere else to go and no one else who would tolerate what you've been doing." I felt tears on my own cheeks now, hot and angry and sad all at once. "But Clara, I can't keep sacrificing my own well-being for someone who doesn't care if I live or die. I just can't do it anymore." She stood there for a long moment, her face contorted with emotions I couldn't read. Anger, fear, confusion, maybe even shame. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. Her bedroom door didn't slam this time. It closed with a soft, final click that somehow felt worse. I sat alone in the living room as afternoon faded into evening, replaying the conversation in my mind. Had I been too harsh? Too demanding? Was I really willing to make my own daughter homeless just because she'd failed to meet my needs during a difficult time? The guilt tried to creep back in, the familiar voice that said good mothers didn't issue ultimatums, didn't make their love conditional, didn't put their own needs first. But another voice, newer and stronger, reminded me of what Linda had said, that I mattered too, that boundaries weren't cruelty but survival, that I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they wouldn't even acknowledge I was burning. That night, I slept fitfully, waking every few hours to the sound of my own racing heart. In one of those dark hours before dawn, I heard Clara's door open, heard her moving around upstairs. For a moment, I thought she might be leaving, might actually be packing her things to go. Part of me hoped she was. Another part, the part that had loved her since before she was born, ached at the thought. But when morning came, she was still there. I heard her in the bathroom, heard the water running, heard her door close again. The house settled back into silence. But it was different now. Something had shifted. Words had been spoken that couldn't be taken back. Lines had been drawn that couldn't be erased. Over the next few days, Clara began doing small things. She took out the trash without being asked. She washed a few dishes in the sink. She bought milk when we ran out. These tiny gestures felt almost insulting in their inadequacy, like a child trying to make up for breaking a valuable heirloom by offering a nickel from their piggy bank. But they were also something I'd never seen before. Acknowledgement. Action. The smallest possible recognition that maybe, perhaps, she had some responsibility here. I didn't thank her for these things. Didn't praise her for doing the absolute bare minimum that any adult living in a shared space should do. I just watched and waited and wondered if it was the beginning of real change or just a temporary performance designed to buy more time and rent-free comfort. Linda called every evening, as she'd promised. "How are you feeling? Is the wound healing? Is she treating you any better?" "My body's getting stronger," I told her one night, about a week after our confrontation. "The infection's gone. I can move around more easily now. I even made it to the mailbox and back today without having to stop and rest." "That's wonderful. And Clara?" "She's trying, I think. Little things. Nothing that would actually count as taking care of me, but more than she was doing before." I paused, trying to find the right words. "I don't know if it's real or if she's just scared I'll actually follow through on asking her to leave." "Does it matter?" Linda asked. "Either way, she's learning that her actions have consequences. That you're not just going to absorb her cruelty indefinitely and keep providing for her no matter how she treats you." "I suppose that's true?" I looked out the window at the twilight settling over the neighborhood. Families were coming home from work, lights turning on in windows, the ordinary rhythms of ordinary lives. But Linda, I feel so guilty, like I'm failing as a mother by not just accepting her as she is, loving her unconditionally. "Loving someone unconditionally doesn't mean accepting abuse unconditionally," Linda said firmly. "And yes, what she did was abusive. Neglect is abuse, Samara. Leaving you to suffer when she had the power to help, that's abuse. You can love her and still refuse to let her treat you that way." After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about that word, abuse. I'd never applied it to my relationship with Clara before. Abuse was what happened in other families, dramatic and violent and obvious. It wasn't the slow erosion of dignity through 1,000 small cruelties. It wasn't being ignored and dismissed and treated as invisible by someone who should love you most. But maybe it was. Maybe abuse came in many forms, and some of them were so quiet and gradual that you didn't recognize them until you were already drowning. The follow-up appointment at urgent care confirmed what I'd been feeling. My body was healing. The infection was gone. The incision was closing properly. The danger had passed. The same young doctor who'd treated me looked relieved to see me in better condition, standing straighter, with color back in my face. "Your sister did an excellent job caring for the wound," she said, examining the site with careful fingers. "This looks much, much better. You're out of the woods." Out of the woods. The phrase echoed in my mind as I drove myself home. The first time I'd driven since before the surgery. My body was out of the woods. But what about the rest of me? What about the life I had to return to? The daughter waiting at home who might or might not have learned anything from our confrontation. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, gathering my strength for whatever awaited me inside. The house looked the same as always. Ordinary, suburban, the kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. No one driving by would guess at the quiet devastation that had occurred within those walls, the way a whole relationship had splintered and was now trying to decide whether to heal or break completely. Inside, the house was clean. Not just picked up, but actually clean. The floors had been vacuumed, the surfaces wiped down, the clutter organized. Clara's shoes were lined up by the door instead of scattered across the entryway. The kitchen counters were clear, dishes washed and put away. Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open in front of her. When I came in, she looked up, and her face held an expression I hadn't seen in years, something between shame and determination. "I've been looking at jobs," she said without preamble, "and apartments, places I could afford if I had a job." She gestured at the screen. "I found a few positions I'm qualified for. I'm going to apply to all of them tomorrow." I set my purse down slowly, not quite believing what I was hearing. "Okay." And I called Dad. The word felt strange, foreign. She never talked about him. We'd had an unspoken agreement that he simply didn't exist in our lives. I found him on social media. We talked for a while. My heart clenched. After all these years, all my sacrifices, she'd reached out to the man who'd abandoned us both? The man who'd chosen his own comfort over his responsibility to his child? What did he say? A lot of things. She looked down at her hands. He told me about his life, his other kids, his career. And when I told him about you, about what happened with the surgery, about how her voice broke. He said I was exactly like him, selfish, unable to see past my own needs. He said he was sorry for passing that on to me. The words hung between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to process. Her father. The man who'd walked away 33 years ago without looking back, who'd never sent a birthday card or a child support check, who'd erased us from his life as if we'd never existed. And now, somehow, his voice had reached across all those years of silence to tell our daughter something I'd been trying to make her see for weeks. "He abandoned you," I said quietly, fighting to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "He left us with nothing, and you're taking life advice from him?" "No, not advice." Clara closed the laptop, her hands trembling slightly. "Confirmation. He confirmed what you've been trying to tell me, that I've been acting like someone who only thinks about herself, someone who takes and never gives back." She looked up at me, and her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "He told me that his other kids, my half-siblings, don't speak to him anymore, that his wife left him 5 years ago, that he's alone now because he spent his whole life putting himself first, and everyone finally got tired of it." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, my legs suddenly unsteady. This conversation felt surreal, like I'd stepped into an alternate reality where Clara actually saw herself clearly, where consequences existed, where actions mattered. "He said the worst part isn't being alone," Clara continued, her voice getting smaller. "It's knowing that it's his fault, that he had people who loved him, and he pushed them all away by treating them like they didn't matter. He said he sees himself in me, and he doesn't want me to end up like him." A tear slid down her cheek. "He said if I don't change now, I'll wake up one day in an empty house and realize everyone who ever cared about me finally gave up." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to reach across the table and take her hand and tell her it wasn't that bad, that she could change, that everything would be okay. But another part of me, the part that was still healing from being told I smelled like death, from lying on a bathroom floor, from watching my own daughter lock her door rather than help me, that part stayed silent and still. "I don't want to be like him," Clara whispered. "But Mom, I don't know how to be different. I've been this way for so long I don't even know when it started. When I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as just there, like furniture, like something that would always exist no matter how I treated it." The honesty was like a knife, sharp and clean and painful. But it was also the first real thing she'd said to me in years. Not an excuse, not a deflection, not a justification, just the truth, ugly and raw. "You were 10, I said finally. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. That's when I noticed it starting. You'd always been a sweet child, thoughtful and kind. But around 10, something shifted. You started rolling your eyes when I spoke, making little comments about my clothes, my job, the things I couldn't afford to buy you. I told myself it was just normal preteen attitude, that all kids went through it. I remember that," Clara said softly. "I remember my friends at school talking about their parents' jobs, their houses, their vacations, and I remember feeling ashamed, like you weren't enough, like our life wasn't enough." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "There was this girl, Madison. Her mom was a lawyer. They had a big house and went to Disney World every year. And one day Madison asked what you did for work, and when I said you worked at a department store, she laughed. She said, 'Like a cashier,' in this voice that made it sound like the most pathetic thing in the world. I remembered that year. Remembered Clara suddenly refusing to let me pick her up from school, insisting on taking the bus instead. Remembered her asking me to stay in the car during parent events, claiming she could find her own way. I'd thought she was just growing up, asserting independence. I hadn't realized she was ashamed of me. I never corrected her, Clara continued. Never defended you. I just nodded and changed the subject. And after that, it got easier to pretend you were less than you were, to focus on everything I didn't have instead of everything you were giving me. She looked directly at me now. I spent 23 years being ashamed of you, of the sacrifices you made, of the fact that you worked so hard and we still didn't have much, and I never once stopped to think about what that must have felt like for you. The kitchen clock ticked in the silence. Outside, a dog barked. Normal sounds in a moment that felt anything but normal. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me years ago?" "Because I didn't see it. I didn't see what I was doing, how I was treating you. It just felt normal. You were always there, always taking care of things, always putting me first. I thought that's just what you were supposed to do, what mothers did." She swallowed hard. "And then you got sick. And suddenly you needed me instead of the other way around. And I realized I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to put someone else first because you never taught me that lesson. You protected me from ever having to." There it was again. The truth that Linda had tried to tell me, that I'd been resisting, that in my determination to give Clara everything, to shield her from hardship, to make her life easier than mine had been, I'd accidentally created someone who couldn't function in a relationship that required reciprocity. Someone who took love for granted because it had always been freely given, no matter how badly she behaved. "So what happens now?" I asked. The question applied to so many things. To our relationship, to her living situation, to whether any of this recognition would translate into actual change. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I want to say I'll be better, do better, but I don't actually know how. I've been looking at therapists too. There's one who specializes in family relationships and, emotional patterns or something like that. She has an opening next week." She looked down at the table. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't undo the last few weeks, or the last few years, or any of it. But it's something." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But all I saw was exhaustion, the same bone-deep tiredness I'd been feeling, the weight of carrying something too heavy for too long, and finally setting it down. "I need you to understand something," I said carefully. "Even if you do all of that, get a job, find an apartment, go to therapy, become a completely different person, our relationship might not recover. The damage might be too deep. I might not be able to trust you again or feel safe being vulnerable around you. That's not me punishing you. It's just the reality of what happens when trust is broken this badly." She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "I know. Dad said the same thing, that sometimes the consequences of our actions are permanent, even if we're sorry. Even if we change, that some things can't be fixed, just learned from." It was strange, hearing her father's words coming from her mouth. The man who'd caused me so much pain, whose abandonment had shaped my entire adult life, was now somehow helping our daughter see what I'd been unable to make her see. I didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. "I'm going to keep looking for work," Clara said, closing the laptop with a gentle click. "And I'll pay rent once I have a job. Not because you're making me, but because it's what I should have been doing all along. And I'll take care of my own meals, my own laundry, my own space. I'll stop acting like you're the hired help in your own house." "Okay," I said. Just that one word, because anything more felt premature. This was one conversation, one moment of clarity. Whether it would translate into sustained change remained to be seen. Clara stood up, hesitated, then moved toward me like she might hug me. I stiffened involuntarily, my body remembering rejection before my mind could process the intention. She saw my reaction and stopped, stepping back with understanding in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for all of it. I know that's not enough, but I need you to know I mean it." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She left the kitchen, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs, her door closing with that same soft click. And I sat there in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on lights, just existing in the space between who we'd been and who we might become. Linda called that evening and I told her everything. The job search, the therapist, the conversation with Clara's father, the apology. "Do you believe her?" Linda asked bluntly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to, but I've been disappointed so many times. I've seen her make promises before and then just not follow through. Talk is easy. Change is hard." "Yes, it is," Linda agreed. "But Samara, you did something incredibly hard. You set boundaries. You stood up for yourself. You stopped accepting crumbs and demanding to be treated like a human being. Whether or not she actually changes, you changed. And that matters." After we hung up, I realized she was right. Something fundamental had shifted in me during these weeks of suffering. I'd been forced to confront the reality of my relationship with my daughter, to see clearly what I'd been making excuses for, to recognize my own worth even when the person I loved most treated me as worthless. I'd spent 33 years defining myself as Clara's mother, organizing my identity around that single role, measuring my value by how well I performed it, accepting that my needs and dreams and personhood were secondary to hers. But I was more than her mother. I was Samara, a woman who'd survived poverty and single parenthood and crushing disappointment, a woman who'd worked for 3 decades without recognition or advancement but had shown up every single day anyway, a woman who'd loved deeply and sacrificed completely, and was still here, still standing, still capable of fighting for herself. That realization didn't make the pain go away, didn't heal the wounds Clara's neglect had inflicted, but it did something else, something perhaps more important. It reminded me that I had existed before her and would continue existing after our relationship ended or transformed into something unrecognizable, that my worth wasn't dependent on her love or approval or recognition. 3 weeks later, Clara got a job. Not the high-powered position she'd always imagined she deserved, but a practical one. Administrative assistant at a medical office, answering phones and scheduling appointments. She came home that first day with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. Pride mixed with exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind that comes from honest work, rather than the performative tiredness she'd always claimed when I'd asked her to help around the house. "How was it?" I asked from the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. My body had healed enough that I could stand for longer periods now, could chop vegetables and stir pots without needing to rest every few minutes. "Hard," she admitted, setting her purse on the counter. "My feet hurt. My head hurts from learning all the computer systems. One patient yelled at me because her appointment time got mixed up, and it wasn't even my fault." She paused, and something flickered across her face. Understanding, maybe. "Is this what it was like for you? Every day at the department store?" "Yes," I said simply. "Except I did it for 30 years. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me something, a budget spreadsheet she'd created. Income, expenses, savings goals. She'd calculated how long it would take to save enough for first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit on a modest apartment. 6 months, she said, if I'm careful. If I don't eat out or buy anything unnecessary. 6 months and I can move out, support myself." She looked at me directly. "I'll pay you rent, starting with my first paycheck. $400 a month. I looked up what a room costs around here. It's not much, but it's something." I hadn't asked for rent, hadn't even brought it up since our confrontation. But here she was, offering it, taking responsibility without being forced. It was such a small thing in the grand scheme of what she owed me, but it was also enormous. It was acknowledgement. It was effort. It was change beginning to take actual shape, rather than just existing as words. "Okay," I said. "Thank you." That night, we ate dinner at the same table, but the silence between us was different. Not comfortable yet, but not hostile either. Just 2 people existing in the same space, navigating new territory without a map. The therapy sessions began the following week. Clara didn't talk much about what happened in them, but I could see subtle shifts. She started asking before using my things. She cleaned up after herself without prompting. She offered to cook dinner occasionally, and though the food was often overcooked or underseasoned, I ate it without complaint, because the gesture mattered more than the execution. One evening, about a month after she'd started working, Clara came home with a small bag from the drugstore. She set it on the kitchen counter where I was making tea. "I got you something," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's not much," but I saw it and thought. Inside the bag was a heating pad, the kind designed for back pain and sore muscles. The kind I'd mentioned needing weeks ago when my surgical pain had radiated into my lower back, but that I'd never bought because it felt like an unnecessary expense when I had bills to pay. "I remember you said you needed one of these," Clara continued, still not looking at me. "And I know your back's been hurting from the surgery. So I thought—" She trailed off, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since she was small. I pulled the heating pad out of the bag, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was such a simple thing, $20, maybe $30, but it represented something much larger. Attention, listening, care. She'd heard me express a need, and she'd remembered it. She'd used her own money, her first real paycheck, to address it. "Thank you," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. "This is very thoughtful." She nodded quickly and left the kitchen, but I saw her wipe at her eyes as she went. And I stood there holding a heating pad and crying quietly, because after weeks of numbness and anger and grief, I was finally feeling something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. The tiniest crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. Linda noticed the changes too. During our weekly calls, I told her about the job, the rent payments that arrived like clockwork, the small acts of consideration that were becoming more frequent. "How do you feel about it?" she asked carefully. "Are you letting yourself hope, or are you still protecting yourself?" "Both," I admitted. "I want to believe she's really changing, but I'm also terrified of letting my guard down and getting hurt again. It's like I'm watching someone who looks like my daughter act like the daughter I always wanted, and I don't know if it's real or if it's just temporary because she needs a place to live." "That's wise," Linda said. "Trust takes time to rebuild. Maybe it never fully comes back. But Samara, what she's doing, showing up, making effort, trying to change, that matters even if you never feel completely safe with her again." The therapy was helping Clara in ways I hadn't expected. She came home one evening and asked if we could talk. We sat in the living room, the same space where I'd issued my ultimatum weeks before, and she pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My therapist had me write something," she said, unfolding it with shaking hands. "She said I needed to really look at what I'd done, not just apologize in vague terms. So I made a list of specific things, moments where I failed you." She took a deep breath. "She said I should read it to you, if you're willing to hear it." I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it, wasn't sure I could handle having all those moments enumerated, made explicit, turned into a catalog of cruelty. But I nodded anyway, because healing required honesty, even when honesty hurt. Clara's voice shook as she read. "The time you asked me to drive you to your mammogram appointment, and I said I was too busy, so you took 2 buses to get there. The time you fell in the grocery store parking lot and called me for help, and I told you to call an ambulance because I was watching a movie. The time you were sick with the flu and I went out with friends instead of staying home to check on you. The time—" Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "The time you told me you were proud of me for finishing college, and I said, 'You should be, you paid for it,' like it was an insult instead of a gift." The list went on, and on. Moment after moment of casual cruelty, small betrayals that I'd absorbed and forgiven and tried to forget, because acknowledging them would have meant acknowledging how badly I was being treated. Hearing them all together, in her voice, was devastating, but it was also necessary. She needed to confront what she'd done, and I needed to have my pain recognized, validated, made real, instead of being dismissed as oversensitivity or maternal martyrdom. When she finished, we both sat in silence for a long time. The paper lay on the coffee table between us, covered in her handwriting, a document of damage that couldn't be undone but could at least be acknowledged. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," Clara said finally, "or to make excuses. My therapist said I need to take full accountability, to stop hiding from what I've done behind vague apologies, to look at it clearly so I understand why you might never fully trust me again. Do you understand that?" I asked quietly. That even if you do everything right from now on, I might never feel completely safe with you? That you might spend years being a good daughter and I still might flinch when you walk into a room? Yes, she whispered. I understand that, and I have to accept it, because it's not about whether you forgive me or not. It's about me becoming someone who doesn't need forgiveness because I've stopped doing harm. The wisdom in those words, wisdom that came from her therapist probably, but that she'd chosen to hear and internalize, gave me something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not hope that everything would be magically fixed, but hope that growth was possible, that people could change if they were willing to do the hard work of looking at themselves honestly. 2 months after Clara started working, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a short letter written in handwriting I hadn't seen in over 3 decades. Samara, it began. Clara found me recently and we've been talking. She told me about your surgery, about how sick you were, about how badly she failed you. And she told me that in failing you, she was acting exactly like I did when I left. I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness. I don't expect it and probably don't deserve it. But I want you to know that you were right about me, about what kind of man I was. And I'm sorry for every moment of the past 33 years that you carried alone what should have been our shared burden. This money is a fraction of what I owe for child support, for help, for partnership. It won't fix anything, but maybe it will help. You deserved better than me. You deserved better than what life gave you. I hope you know that now. Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, each time discovering new emotions beneath the surface. Anger, yes. He'd abandoned us, disappeared, left me to raise our daughter alone while he apparently built a new life with new children and new chances. But also something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like closure. He'd been wrong to leave. He'd failed as a father and a partner. But he was also right that Clara had learned his patterns, had inherited his selfishness not through genetics, but through observation of what she'd been protected from knowing about. She'd grown up thinking her mother's sacrifice was normal, natural, something women just did without reciprocity. She'd never had to face what it meant when someone chose themselves over everyone else because I'd shielded her from that knowledge. The check sat on my kitchen table for days while I decided what to do with it. $5,000 was more money than I'd had in my savings account in years. It could cover the medical bills from my surgery, the physical therapy I'd been putting off because of the cost, the new mattress I desperately needed but couldn't justify buying, or I could tear it up, send it back, refuse to accept anything from a man who'd given nothing when it mattered. In the end, I deposited the check. Not because Marcus deserved my forgiveness, or because money could erase 33 years of absence. I deposited it because I deserved to use resources that were rightfully mine, that should have been there all along. I deserved the physical therapy that would help my body fully recover. I deserved the peace of mind that came from having medical bills paid. I deserved something other than bare survival for once in my adult life. With part of the money, I did something I'd been dreaming about for years but had never allowed myself. I enrolled in an online nursing program. At 55, I was finally going back to finish what I'd started at 22, before pregnancy and single parenthood had derailed every plan I'd made for myself. The first day I logged into the student portal and saw my name listed as an active student, I cried. Not sad tears, but something else entirely. Relief, maybe, or vindication, proof that it wasn't too late, that I could still become who I'd always meant to be. Clara noticed the textbooks that started arriving, saw me studying at the kitchen table in the evenings after dinner. One night, she sat down across from me while I was highlighting sections about wound care. Ironic, given my recent experience. "You're going back to school?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "I am. I was 2 semesters away from finishing my nursing degree when I got pregnant with you. I always meant to go back, but there was never time or money or—" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Or permission, I guess. I never felt like I was allowed to want something for myself. Permission from who? From me, mostly. I spent so long believing that being a mother meant erasing every other part of myself that I forgot I was allowed to have dreams that had nothing to do with you." I looked up at her. "That's not your fault. It was my choice. But it was also a choice that hurt both of us in the end." Clara was quiet for a moment. Processing. Will you have to quit working? The program is online, designed for working adults. It'll take 3 years instead of 2 because I can only go part-time, but I can manage it around a job. I closed the textbook. I've been applying to positions at medical offices and clinics, places where my retail experience with customer service might transfer, where I could get my foot in the door while finishing my degree. That's amazing, Mom. And the strange thing was, she sounded like she meant it. Really amazing. I'm proud of you. The words should have filled me with joy. For years, I'd longed to hear my daughter say she was proud of me. But now, having heard them, I realized something important. I didn't need them anymore. I was proud of myself. That was enough. 4 months after the surgery, Clara moved out. She'd found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy but clean and affordable. I helped her pack, carefully, mindfully of my still healing body, and we loaded boxes into her car in relative silence. The apartment was a studio, barely bigger than her bedroom had been, but it was hers, paid for with her own money, furnished with second-hand finds and hand-me-downs, decorated with her own choices. Standing in her empty bedroom afterward, I felt an unexpected mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly. The house was mine again, my space no longer negotiated around someone else's moods and needs. But also sadness, because this was how it should have happened years ago. This was the natural progression that had been delayed by her refusal to grow up and my refusal to push her. She called me the next day. Mom, I just wanted to say thank you for letting me stay as long as you did, for not actually kicking me out when you could have, for, her voice wavered, for loving me even when I made it really hard to love me. You're my daughter, I said simply. That never changes. How I allow you to treat me, that can change. But loving you? That's permanent. I know. And I'm going to keep working on being someone worthy of that love. Not just saying it, but showing it. We had dinner together once a week after that. She'd come over on Sunday evenings, and we'd cook together, something we'd never really done before. She was terrible at cooking, burning rice and oversalting everything. But she tried. And in the trying, in the showing up, in the consistent effort week after week, something began to rebuild between us. Not the old relationship. That was gone, broken beyond repair. But something new, something more honest, something built on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. Linda visited on a Saturday, about 6 months after everything had fallen apart, and started slowly piecing back together. We sat in my backyard, drinking iced tea in the warm sunshine, and she looked at me with something like wonder. You look different, she said. Not just healthier, though you do. You look lighter somehow. I feel lighter, I admitted. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. And now it's finally gone. Is it really gone, though? Or just different? Different, I said after thinking about it. Clara and I will never have the relationship I once thought we'd have. Too much has happened. Too much hurt. But we have something. And it's real. In a way the old relationship never was. It's not based on fantasy or obligation or guilt. It's just 2 adults trying to figure out how to be family to each other. And that's enough? Some days it is. Some days I still grieve for what we lost, or what we never really had in the first place. But yes, mostly it's enough, because I have more than just her now. I have myself back. Linda smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I'm proud of you, you know, for setting boundaries, for standing up for yourself, for not accepting cruelty just because it came from someone you loved. I learned from watching you, I said. You could have kept avoiding me after that Thanksgiving fight. You could have decided I was too difficult, too much drama. But you showed up. You came when I needed you. You told me hard truths. You taught me that love without respect isn't really love at all. The nursing program was harder than I'd expected, but in a good way. It required me to stretch my mind in directions it hadn't gone in decades, to memorize terminology and procedures and anatomy. My classmates were mostly in their 20s and 30s, but there were a few other older students who'd come back to finish interrupted educations. We formed a study group, meeting virtually every week, and I discovered something I'd been missing for years: community, friendship based on shared goals rather than proximity or obligation. One of my classmates, Janet, was 52 and had gone back to school after her divorce. My husband used to tell me I was too old to start over, she told us during one of our study sessions, that I should just accept my life as it was. But you know what? Starting over at 50 is better than spending the next 30 years wishing I had. Her words resonated with something deep inside me. I'd spent so much of my life accepting circumstances I didn't want, situations that hurt me, relationships that diminished me, all because I believed I didn't have the right to ask for more. That wanting something different was selfish or unrealistic, or simply impossible at my age, with my resources, given my responsibilities. But here I was, at 55, going back to school, building a new relationship with my daughter based on honesty instead of martyrdom, creating a life that centered my own needs and dreams for the first time since I was barely more than a girl myself. And it wasn't too late. It had never been too late. I'd just been told it was, and I'd believed it. Clara started therapy twice a week instead of once. She told me during one of our Sunday dinners that she'd asked for the increase because she realized how much work she still needed to do. "I'm learning about patterns," she said, passing me the salad she'd made, still overdressed but improving, about how children learn to relate to others by watching their parents. And I never saw my father. So I only had you as a model, and you modeled complete self-sacrifice. You showed me that mothers give everything and ask for nothing. That's what I learned love looked like. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I thought I was teaching you about unconditional love. I didn't realize I was teaching you that it's okay to take advantage of people who love you. It's not your fault. You did the best you could with what you had. But Mom, we both have to take responsibility for our parts. You for not setting boundaries sooner, me for not seeing you as a person instead of a function." She met my eyes. "My therapist says that both things can be true at the same time, that you made mistakes as a parent, and that I made choices as an adult, that acknowledging your part doesn't erase my responsibility." The maturity in her words, the nuanced understanding of how relationships work, it gave me hope that the change was real, that we were both growing, both learning, both becoming people who could have a healthy relationship instead of the toxic dynamic we'd fallen into. 1 year after the surgery, almost to the day, I graduated from the first year of my nursing program with a 4.0 GPA. Clara came to the small ceremony the online school held for local students. She brought flowers. Nothing expensive, just a mixed bouquet from the grocery store. And when they called my name, she stood up and cheered loudly enough that other people turned to look. Afterward, we went to dinner at a restaurant I'd never been able to afford before. Clara insisted on paying, even though I could have covered it with money I'd carefully saved from my part-time clinic job. "Let me do this," she said, when I protested. "Please, I want to celebrate you. I want to show you that I see what you're doing, what you've accomplished. Let me honor that." So I did. I let her treat me. I let myself be celebrated. I let myself feel proud of what I'd achieved, instead of immediately moving to the next struggle, the next sacrifice, the next reason why my needs should take a backseat to someone else's. As we sat across from each other in that restaurant, I realized something profound. I'd spent 33 years trying to earn Clara's love through sacrifice, trying to prove my worth by erasing myself, and I'd failed, because that's not how love works. Real love, the kind that sustains and nourishes and grows, isn't earned through suffering. It's built through honesty, through boundaries, through two people choosing each other while also choosing themselves. "Mom?" Clara's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Where did you go just now?" "I was thinking about how different everything is from a year ago. How close I came to—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "To dying," Clara finished quietly. "I know. I think about that too. About how I almost lost you because I was too selfish to see what I was doing. About how lucky I am that you survived, that you gave me another chance, that you're still here." "I'm still here," I agreed. "And I'm going to keep being here. But Clara, I'm here for me now. For my dreams, my goals, my life. You're part of that life, and I love you. But you're not the center of it anymore." "Good," she said, and her eyes were wet but her voice was steady. "That's how it should be. That's what healthy looks like. And I'm sorry it took me 33 years to figure that out." We finished our meal talking about my classes, her job, the small details of lives that were finally moving forward instead of staying stuck in old patterns. When we left the restaurant, she hugged me, carefully, aware of my body's limitations even a year later, and I let myself feel the affection without question or doubt. Driving home alone that night, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, lying on a bathroom floor, unable to stand, listening to her daughter lock the door rather than help. That woman had been broken, beaten down by decades of pouring herself out for someone who couldn't see her value. But she'd also been strong. Strong enough to survive, strong enough to demand better, strong enough to rebuild from nothing. I am that woman. And I am this woman too, the one going back to school at 55, setting boundaries, choosing herself, building a life that honors every part of who she is and who she always wanted to be. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first held Clara as a newborn and promised to give her everything, but it was real, it was honest, and it was mine. And that, I'd finally learned, was more than enough.